Cornelia was cooking in the kitchen when a soft and unobtrusive signal buzzed, indicating the arrival of a visitor. The woman switched the button on the smart system control panel, and the monitor instantly displayed a picture of the current situation around the perimeter of the lavish estate. But the usual landscape completed a familiar car. Barely pressing another button, Cornelia heard Isabella's demanding voice. "How long are you going to keep your beloved mother waiting at the gate? Did you fall asleep or something?" "No, Mom, I woke up a while ago, but I had no idea you would drop by today, just when the birds start singing at dawn. I believe there's no need to inform you because the doors of your house should be open for me at any time of the day." Isabella was well aware that her daughter had recently installed a smart home system on her property. However, the former prima donna of the National Music Theater used this circumstance solely for selfish purposes. Although the automatic mechanism was already gently opening the gates at the entrance, the woman posed in front of the surveillance camera for a couple more minutes. Cornelia knew that her mother was hungry for a dose of compliments this way. Applause and praise, seasoned with flattery, served as the main source of energy for the elderly lady. Therefore, the daughter decided to pour a few drops of invigorating balm onto her mother's heart. "Mom, you look absolutely stunning today. And this new hat makes you look 20 years younger." Receiving a dose of adrenaline, the opera diva performed a little more for the camera. She casually said to the driver, "Wait somewhere here. I won't be long." Cornelia watched her mother as if she were watching an engaging movie on television. Yes, my incomparable Isabella and her repertoire. I wonder how father has endured her pathological selfishness all his life. Mom is ready to turn not only her own home but also mine into a theater stage. Moreover, we are all assigned supporting roles, while she always takes center stage. But what surprises me the most is the miracle that she gave a birth to me into this world. The guest didn't rush. Before proudly walking into the kitchen, she went around the entire first floor. Perhaps the owner of the huge mansion was talking too loudly, so Isabella immediately made a remark. "Cornelia, have you started talking to yourself? That's a very bad omen. You should see a doctor." The young woman was accustomed to her mother living in a monologue rhythm. She asked questions to the interlocutor, but she answered them herself. The interlocutor was supposed to patiently wait for a pause. Usually, the change of mise-en-scene served as a signal for the reply of the second character. The former prima donna did not want to torment the audience in the form of her own daughter. She gracefully sat on the edge of the corner sofa, making sure to nod expressively at Cornelia. "Could you make me a cup of green tea?" "Sure. It's a pleasure, madam." The hostess poured the fragrant drink into a beautiful cup from a Chinese set. The mother scrutinized her daughter critically. "I hope it's not too hot. Hot drinks are harmful to my throat center. If I remember correctly, cold drinks are also not good for you, right? Mom, but you hardly ever go on stage. Relax and live a normal life. It's time for you to adapt to new conditions at your age." Out of indignation, Isabella even stood up. "I am an actress, and for me, a normal life is the theater. For example, I can't stand like an ordinary cook by the stove. It's indecent. Cornelia, and all this electronics scattered everywhere also annoys me. Don't you have enough money to hire servants?" Cornelia poured tea into her large ceramic cup with a positive affirmation that said, "A vessel with morning motivation." Then the woman sat on a soft couch next to her mother. "The world has been living by new rules for a long time, Mom. After all, it's the 21st century. Smart technology significantly facilitates existence. It's much more beneficial than hiring a whole staff of employees, like you and Dad do." The women often argued about the meaning and values of life, but these conversations were the bridge that connected their family. And now, for a while, Isabella forgot about her grand destiny and became an ordinary mother who genuinely cared for her only daughter. But here, dear Cornelia, I can't agree with you. People can make the house a warm place. And it doesn't matter at all what kind of work they do. It's you, the younger generation. You are focused on social status and other trivialities today. But for old-fashioned people, communication is the most important thing. Both your father and I, in short, can simply talk to the gardener or the cook at any time. It's much more enjoyable than pressing buttons and listening to the mechanical voice of an answering machine. As if wanting to reinforce her contempt for technology, Isabella picked up the remote control from the table and pressed the first button she came across. "Mom, what are you doing?" Something inside the house started buzzing loudly. Cornelia jumped up and snatched the remote control from the woman's hands. The actress shrugged disdainfully. "You've completely lost your mind here. Living in such a huge mansion together with your husband. Don't you feel lonely? You should think about having children. It would be more fun. And it's about time too. You've been married for 7 years and still don't have any children." The mother stepped on the most sensitive nerve, and Cornelia decided to change the subject. "Mom, you probably didn't come here at the dawn just to tell me that a live cook is better than a branded coffee maker or an electric meat grinder. You're right 100 times, and I won't even argue. But it seems to me that you came here for a completely different reason. Better tell me about yourself and how's Dad doing? It's been a while since he last came here." Isabella remarked mischievously. "Don't try to confuse me, dear. You know I can see through any of your maneuvers. And I have the right to ask you uncomfortable questions. Tell me, when will your father and I have grandchildren?" Cornelia was taken aback because she didn't know the answer herself. "I don't know, Mom. Honestly, there's so much going on right now. There's the opening of a new enterprise and promoting ready-made collections. In short, it's a complete mess. Of course, business is very important. But for any normal woman, family should come first. Even with my peculiar occupation, I did everything to ensure my family was complete. A home without children is empty and cold. Many people realize this when their life is coming to an end." Cornelia understood that this beautiful turn of speech was also taken from some monologue. She already breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that all the sharp corners had been avoided in today's conversation, but the tireless Isabella decided to use her last prepared remark. "Oh, by the way, where is your advertiser? Where did he disappear to so early in the morning?" Cornelia herself was very eager to know the answer to that question, but she tried not to show any sign that her mother had hit a sore spot again. "Mom, firstly, Victor is not an advertiser, but my deputy in public relations." Isabella impatiently interrupted her daughter. "In simpler terms, your husband is a freeloader and a slacker. You're spinning like a squirrel on a wheel, and all he does is fool around with other women." "Mom, what are you talking about? I didn't expect it from you." The guest stood up abruptly. There was no trace of pretense in her gaze and movements. Cornelia saw a mother who genuinely cares for her daughter. Isabella took Cornelia's hand as if she wanted to pass on some of her strength to her. "My girl, I understand perfectly well your desire not to notice reality. Believe me, based on my life experience, that can only last for so long. There will definitely come a day when reality hits you like a tsunami. So it's better to monitor the seismic situation." Cornelia felt an unpleasant lump in her throat. "Mom, I don't understand what you're talking about." The elderly woman sank back onto the soft sofa. She was no longer posing for the camera and didn't think about the audience left far away on the other side of the fallen curtain. "Cornelia, I feel uncomfortable discussing this topic with you, but not long ago, I found out about my son-in-law's tricks. Just so you know, dear, I'm not accusing him out of personal animosity, but how can I put this more gently? Your husband leads a double life. You know that I never rely on gossip and rumors, so I didn't believe what they were saying about your Victor for a long time. You know how the theater community likes to gossip about famous people. I didn't believe it, but yesterday I saw my son-in-law with another woman with my own eyes. I don't want to make hasty conclusions, but I think you need to think about the situation that has arisen." Cornelia buried her face in her mother's shoulder and started crying. She felt the last barrier shatter into tiny pieces. "Mommy, I believed in my happiness for so long. My girl, happiness is like a firebird. It's easier to catch than to hold on to. Do you think everything was smooth sailing for your father and me? A woman must take measures in time for the sake of preserving the well-being of the family." Isabella pressed her daughter to her chest and stroked her back, saying, "You can cry. Sometimes it's beneficial. But believe me, everything will be fine, my dear. Perhaps it's a false alarm, and we're shedding tears here for no reason." Cornelia wanted to believe in it, but she herself had long suspected her husband's infidelity. However, only a blind person could not see it. From her early childhood, Cornelia was taught that every person is born to fulfill their special mission on earth. She was raised in the best traditions, instilling a taste for various forms of art. It was precisely due to their upbringing that Cornelia's parents sometimes had disagreements, since Isabella's ancestors were renowned musicians and singers, while Antonio came from a dynasty of scientists. They met at the crossroads of times when the world itself was changing, along with perspectives on life. Therefore, millions of inhabitants of the once vast country had to adapt on the fly. Some managed to integrate into the new life, while others fell by the wayside. Antonio, or rather his father, felt the direction in which the winds of change were blowing before others. After receiving a diploma in geodetic engineering, he did not join the expedition of enthusiasts but supported the cooperative movement gaining momentum at that time. Antonio expected his father to scold him for such self-will, but he supported his son. "You did the right thing, Antonio. You felt the time pulse. Those who manage to keep up to date will be lucky tomorrow." Antonio himself understood that the future depended solely on personal initiative. Even in the final years of his studies in the student environment, the transition from socialism to the era of wild capitalism was actively discussed. The youth of that time was far from grasping the concept of dialectics, but everyone wanted to live well. Antonio proved to be more agile than his peers from the institute. He tried his hand in trade, construction, and banking. Then he realized that the financial sector was the most promising. In just 6 months, the young man amassed a fortune through not entirely clean operations. However, Antonio did not wear raspberry jackets or gold chains. He lived an ordinary life without flaunting his wealth. Only occasionally could he afford such little indulgences as supporting budding talents. Isabella Rodriguez was of this type of people. The young mezzo-soprano graduate had to sing in smoky restaurants to earn a living. It was in one of these establishments that the future spouses had their first encounter. Antonio was celebrating some important event with his friends, filling their glasses to the brim. But when a charming brunette took the stage and started singing, the entire hall fell silent. In astonishment, Antonio whispered, "Goddess! Such a voice can have only a goddess." The young man spent the whole evening by the small corner of the stage, enjoying the girl's singing. He didn't bother her or make any ambiguous proposals, so Isabella sang that evening only for her most devoted admirer. Later, they strolled through the streets of the sleeping city until dawn, sharing stories about themselves. In a moment of revelation, Isabella confessed to Antonio that she was having trouble finding a job. "You see, I studied classical singing. I have a certain vocal technique. But in the musical theater where I ended up after school, I can't even get a supporting role. They consider it lucky if they put you in the chorus as a replacement. Otherwise, it's just extras. That's why I have to sing in a restaurant. If my father finds out that his daughter is singing for a drunken audience, he'll have a heart attack. He's a distinguished artist himself." Antonio was surprised. Can't the daughter of such a prominent person find a place in the theater? You see, today different factors are at play. Connections are a thing of the past, and our theater is a real snake pit. Access to leading roles is only for the privileged, and past merits don't count anymore. And what about talent? The girl pondered for a moment, then said with resignation, "Strangely enough, money rules today. Those with money are the ones in favor. Talent is just like a free add-on. Our theater is going through tough times, so the director is ready to kiss a hand of anyone who supports the theater. The next day, Antonio went to the theater. He made the chief director an offer that he couldn't refuse. And within a month, posters displaying the name of the rising opera star Isabella were pasted all over the city. The young couple did not have a lavish wedding. They settled for an official ceremony and invited only relatives and friends. The transition to married life was quick and pleasant. Antonio accompanied his wife during her tours, and when times of trouble arose, he hired bodyguards for his beloved woman. Among their circle of friends, the husband proudly said, "Isabella is my muse. When I saw her in the restaurant, I immediately knew it was the one. On that first day of our acquaintance, I felt as if this woman would become my lucky charm." When Cornelia came into the world, the father celebrated the event for an entire month. Under the windows of the maternity ward, he passionately sang "Love Resembling a Dream." The other mothers in the ward openly envied Isabella. It's hard to believe that something like this can happen in such challenging times. "Isabella, you are very lucky with your husband," one joker among them teasingly remarked. "Nowadays, rich guys are in high demand. You need to keep an eye on both of them so that no one steals your man." The opera diva took this warning very seriously. She made every effort to ensure her husband's interest in her never waned. Sometimes, she even had to make sacrifices to keep their family intact. The first time their family boat ran aground was due to the woman's own fault. She strongly desired for their daughter to continue the traditions of their famous family. The father tried to object. "Why impose your own beliefs on the child? Let her choose an occupation she loves." But Isabella didn't give up. "Antonio, one must pursue vocal training from childhood. It's like sports. By the time our girl grows up and understands everything, it will be too late. I was already playing simple pieces on the piano at the age of 3. However, the mother's idea resulted in 3 years of torment for Cornelia. Despite lacking any exceptional talent, she still had to attend music school. One day she pleaded with her father. "Daddy, I'm begging you, please convince Mom to let me quit music school. I'm just a complete hack." Antonio became alert. "Did you come to that conclusion about your abilities yourself?" "No, it was my teacher who said that. But she didn't say it to me directly, she said it to another teacher." The father went to find out the details of the matter. He couldn't accept that someone had called his daughter a hack. After the conversation with the teacher, he calmed down a bit and attended the next lesson with Cornelia. In the presence of her father, the girl completely lost her composure and eventually refused to showcase her vocal abilities. To her surprise, her father firmly declared, "You will continue attending the classes." The reason for this soon became apparent. The girl noticed that her father was courting the very same teacher who had given her low marks. At the age of 11, Cornelia was well aware of the relationships between men and women. Pretending to be an innocent child, she casually mentioned at the table that Daddy was giving splendid bouquets to her vocal teacher. Antonio choked in surprise, and the mother remarked meaningfully, "Our father has a special relationship with art. I wonder which siren has stirred his heart this time." Satisfied with the effect she had caused, Cornelia retreated to her room, but she could hear the voices of her parents coming from their room. The next morning, her mother woke her up with the usual kiss. "Sweetie, from today onwards, you don't have to attend music school anymore. You can enroll in figure skating or artistic gymnastics." The girl started jumping on the bed with joy. "Hooray! I don't have to play those annoying scales anymore. Mom, can I join the kickboxing or judo club? The girls in our class are attending such classes." "No. I don't want my daughter walking around with bruises. Choose a calm hobby. For example, a theater group or macrame." Thus, completely by chance and at her mother's suggestion, Cornelia found herself in a young fashion designer's studio. She never anticipated that she would be so captivated by it. Just 6 months later, the talented schoolgirl presented her first summer collection. Moreover, among the young models was Cornelia herself. The bright lights, beautiful music, and applause from the audience created a fairy tale atmosphere. The parents, too, felt on top of the world, receiving enthusiastic feedback from teachers and acquaintances. Your daughter is a talented girl. She will definitely achieve great heights and work with the best designers in the top fashion houses. Antonio confidently replied, That's exactly what will happen. And if, by some mistake, they don't want to hire my girl, then I will buy her a fashion house. Isabella had no choice but to encourage her husband for such a decision. Antonio, you're the best dad in the world. And what about the best husband? The woman playfully threatened with a graceful finger. In that aspect, there are some shortcomings. You meant to say, were? Fine. Were. While the spouses competed in witticisms, the hall gradually emptied without notice. They also hurried to the exit to wait for Cornelia in the foyer, but suddenly a song from their youth started playing. Love, resembling a dream, made my home happy. The velvety voice of the singer touched their hearts. Antonio even became emotional. Today is such an extraordinary day. Our daughter's first success, and this symbolic song. Isabella, thank you for everything. The staff at the Cultural Center, where the event took place, watched this beautiful scene in astonishment. Touched by her husband's confession, Isabella thought, I made the right decision back then, leaving the theater for the sake of the family and becoming a vocal teacher at the school. She said aloud, Antonio, you haven't called me by my real name in a long time. You know, I really want our daughter to have the same love. Antonio tenderly drew his wife closer. Now he understood perfectly well that there was no one in the world better than his wife. And then he made a promise to himself that he would never, ever look at any other woman in his life. Why would he? He loves his Isabella very much. It's impossible to wish for anyone better. But one wish is not enough. To make a child happy, favorable circumstances are also necessary. Although Cornelia studied in an elite gymnasium attended by children of wealthy parents, many of her peers openly envied her. At the graduation ceremony, her friends enthusiastically discussed not their own future, but the news that Cornelia would be studying abroad. You're so lucky. Your dad really gave you a lucky ticket to happiness. We can only dream of studying in Italy, but for you, it's practically a done deal. Wanting to calm her classmates a bit, the girl remarked with feigned disdain, we also have very good universities. But fashion is born in Italy. And it cost my dad a lot to arrange patronage for me at the Academy of Arts in Milan. One of her friends wished. Cornelia, when you have your own fashion house, don't just pass us by accidentally. You think poorly of me, girls. I'm not one of those who forgets friends. I'll say that. But then, the negative mood of her friends was also fueled by the fact that Cornelia's name was mentioned much more often in the hall during the graduation ceremony. The educational institution recognized her as one of the top graduates, and the teachers asked her to live up to their expectations. However, Cornelia remained unfazed, unapologetic, and accepted congratulations and praise with her head held high. The girl made every effort to study the art of fashion design. She was fortunate to work in the workshops of the most renowned designers. With a prestigious diploma and a wealth of knowledge, she returned to her homeland. Her father immediately declared, Well, it's time to gather stones. The girl was surprised. Dad, what are you talking about? What stones? Antonio laughed. It was a metaphor. Remember, I promised to buy you a fashion house. Of course, I remember. But that was a long time ago, and you, Dad, were also using metaphors. You're wrong, my dear. And now you'll see for yourself. I've already planned and prepared everything in advance. In short, there's a struggling company in your field of expertise that I have in mind. The owner is doing very poorly, and they're on the brink of bankruptcy. I thought that your fresh perspective and knowledge would revitalize the business. And what are you suggesting? First, work there for a while, see how things go, and then. Dad, don't drag it out. What are you hinting at? I'm saying it without any hints. If the business is profitable, I'll invest in it, and you'll become a full-fledged owner of the company. Okay. But I have a question. Why go through the extra steps? Can't we just buy the company outright if it's on the verge of bankruptcy? No, my daughter, we can't. I need 100% guarantees. Cornelia was hired as an ordinary employee in the planning department. On her very first day, she met Victor. Well, to be precise, the young man volunteered to teach her all the intricacies of working with clients. With a professional demeanor, he acquainted Cornelia with the company's affairs. Indeed, I've been working here for less than a year, but I've already grasped the main principle: the customer is always right. Cornelia laughed. That's old news. It's a long-standing truth, and it doesn't work anymore. That's the wrong answer. This principle always works perfectly if you apply it correctly. The young man enthusiastically began to reveal the secrets of his craft to the new employee. By the end of the day, he became quite candid. You know, my family always had financial problems. And then my mother fell seriously ill. So I had to drop out of college. I studied for 3 years. Of course, it's a shame, but there were no other options. I took a year off, but I couldn't return to my studies. But I'm not complaining about my fate. I enjoy my job. Even though I'm just a small-time manager, a lot depends on me too. Victor continued to talk about his job with such enthusiasm that Cornelia didn't dare tell him that the company was on the brink of bankruptcy and he would likely have to look for another source of income soon. The girl merely hinted cautiously that he should consider continuing his education. You shouldn't have dropped out of college. Do your relatives know about it? You could have transferred to a distance learning program. I haven't told anyone yet. As for distance learning, it's challenging. Besides, you know, I've cooled off towards that specialty. I wanted to try my hand at something different, something promising. And what interests you? Well, basically, anything that is well paid. Victor was a very charismatic guy. He had a different perspective on ordinary things. Energy radiated from him. In the company, office workers took short tea breaks every day, and the young man was always the center of attention. Many girls openly liked the proactive employee. Victor, on the other hand, tried to treat all the women with equal attention. But everything changed with the arrival of Cornelia. The colleagues teasingly said, "Don't forget to invite us to the wedding." At first, the young couple felt embarrassed by such remarks, but then they took them as a hint. Initially, their relationship was limited to traditional walks home, but to avoid scaring her suitor with her family situation, Cornelia didn't tell him about her father and mother. At first, she thought they would remain friends. And when she realized she was in love with Victor, she was afraid that confessing her feelings would ruin their relationship. She also hesitated to tell her parents about dating a simple manager. However, as it often happens, the secret unexpectedly became clear. One day during lunch break, Cornelia and Victor went to a cafe to grab a bite. The young man placed their order and then casually mentioned, "There's a rumor going around that our company is changing owners." Cornelia flinched, and Victor noticed. "Don't you have anything to tell me about this? I think it's time for us to start thinking about the future. Or am I wrong?" The girl understood where her suitor was heading, but she hesitated to respond. Victor continued to develop his thought. "Cornelia, we're not teenagers to wander along the waterfront for hours. Of course, I'm not against outdoor walks, but any relationship should develop. So, I believe it's time for us to do things properly. What do you think?" Cornelia laughed. "Are you proposing to me in such an original way? Did it not turn out well? I'm sorry, I imagined it many times. I wanted to make it special, but it seems I started off wrong. What should you have started with then?" "No, first you tell me, will you marry me?" "Of course, I will. But I need to tell you something." "I have something to tell you too. Cornelia, I know who your parents are, but that shouldn't hinder us. We can even leave if necessary. Why should we leave? Well, to avoid unnecessary gossip. I want you, not your father's wealth. This confession made a strong impression on the girl. Victor spoke so sincerely that she believed his words. The parents had different reactions to the news that Cornelia was going to marry a guy from a poor family. Antonio sensibly remarked, I did some inquiries not only about your fiancé but also about other employees in the company. Everyone speaks positively of Victor. He hasn't faltered anywhere. However, Isabella did not hide her discontent. You don't need to visit a fortune teller. It's clear that this Victor is after our money and our status. In our theater circle, there have been many cases like this. At first, it's a great love, and then infidelity and property disputes. The man interrupted his wife. Why are you equating everything and everyone with your colleagues in the theater? The world is much bigger than your theater. If we follow your logic, there should be only marriages of convenience. Remember who we were, Isabella. We weren't wealthy either. But my father was well known. He's a distinguished artist. Let's not impose our stereotypes on our daughter. If she is sure about her beloved one, let her get married. If there is no such certainty, let her wait. But in any case, it should be Cornelia's choice. In the first years of their married life, Cornelia always compared it to a paradise. Victor willingly shared his experiences with her, and she told her husband about her little secrets. The transition of business ownership to the new owner went smoothly for the company's employees. Victor became his wife's main assistant and companion. And without hesitation, Cornelia signed all the necessary documents. After all, she trusted her husband completely. However, when her father found out about it, he yelled at his daughter for the first time in his life. Are you really so dumb to make such a mistake? You need to reverse this. Dad, why? I trust Victor completely. There's no one else I could rely on like that. Antonio looked at his daughter in a special way. Cornelia, you can't even fully trust yourself. I don't want to give examples of the unpleasant consequences of such foolishness now, but try to change everything. You have the power to do it. But it turned out that the contract was drafted in such a way that it couldn't be changed anymore. That document became the first fateful crack in the vessel of their family life. When she directly told her husband that the terms of the contract needed to be changed, he firmly said, No. And don't even think about it. I have invested no less, and maybe even more, in this company. In the 5 years I spent running around for the old owner and for you, I ruined my health. So, I believe I deserve no less than you to have the right to manage the affairs. Cornelia was unpleasantly surprised by her husband's revelations. But she remained silent because she didn't want, or maybe feared, to ruin her relationship with him. Her intuition told her that Victor could use the scandal to his advantage. She noticed how young girls and even mature women looked at him. Once, she couldn't hold back and sarcastically remarked, You're popular among girls, and even mature ladies. Hope no one's going to steal you. Her husband winced as if he had a toothache. Cornelia, I'm not an object, so no one can steal me. And what's the point of all these conversations? What's bothering you? Tell me. Fine, I'll say it. It's only been 5 years since our wedding, but it feels like we've lived 40 years together and have grown tired of each other. You've become secretive. And you're constantly dissatisfied. Your behavior reminds me of the old lady from the fairy tale. That was too much. Victor looked at his wife. Ice-cold hatred froze in his eyes. For the first time in their years of married life, she felt fear. She also wanted to hurt her husband as much as possible, but he was already out of reach, as evidenced by the door slamming shut. Was that it? Or could something else be changed? It was a rhetorical question. Cornelia had no one to consult with, so she let the situation drift freely once again. The only consolation in her life now was her work. Perhaps the not-so-pleasant emotions awakened her dormant talent. And with some unhealthy fervor, Cornelia embarked on developing a new collection. But she didn't tell her husband about it. Cornelia had her own team of women she trusted with important work, so Victor found out about the new collection a few days before the presentation. The man was furious and didn't mince words. "How do you mean? Could you please explain why such important things are happening behind my back? Why am I the last to find out about your new collection? By the way, I had completely different plans." Cornelia had grown accustomed to her spouse's outbursts of anger. She calmly asked, "And is that what you just accused me of, acting behind your back? You didn't share your plans with me either." Victor withstood the blow. He wasn't even embarrassed. "Don't you think, Cornelia, that you're taking too many liberties? According to the agreement, Cornelia didn't let him finish his sentence. "Victor, you're forcing me to take this step. I've decided to review the terms of our agreement. The lawyers are already working on it, so I'm informing you." The man's face contorted with anger. "Cornelia, you will regret this, I swear. Don't threaten me. And one more thing, I reviewed the reports of the recent operations, and there are some things I didn't like. That's why I've decided to conduct a thorough check of all the financial documentation." Victor turned pale. "Everything is in order there." "Well, we'll see. I asked my father to allocate his staff for a couple of days." Victor managed to say with difficulty, "And when will this review take place?" Cornelia looked closely at her husband. He was clearly flustered, which only strengthened her suspicions. But she calmly answered his question. "That's confidential information. And so, even as a partner, I'm not entitled to know about it. It seems to me, Cornelia, that you're taking too much upon yourself. And it seems to me that you've become quite arrogant, my dearly beloved husband. I am still the CEO of this company." The woman turned sharply, and Victor caught a familiar scent of sandalwood. But this gentle fragrance no longer stirred him. Instead, it caused irritation and even aggression. And now, he sent her a malicious warning as she walked away. "For now, you're still the CEO. It's not over yet, my dear." Pleasant sounds of music filled the room, arousing the boldest fantasies. However, Victor couldn't fully enjoy the pleasant ambience due to his recent conversation with his wife. He sighed heavily and immediately heard Valeriana's whisper, "I'm ready to continue." The woman leaned closer to him, but he pushed her away with irritation, saying, "Please, not now." But Valeriana couldn't wait anymore. "My darling, what bothers you? Who spoiled your mood? Or do I have a rival now?" Valeriana was skilled in such matters. And within a minute, Victor was completely under her control. Only when he hurriedly prepared to leave, the girl asked, "Maybe you can tell me what's happening with you? You're not yourself. You've become angry and dissatisfied. Is it because of the wife again?" "You're right. Sometimes I get the feeling that Cornelia is watching me. And I'm afraid she might not approve your collection." The girl exclaimed, "But you told me she completely trusts you." "Yes, I said that. And indeed, all the affairs of the company were in my hands, so I was confident that I could push through your project. But my dearest wife must have been gone mad. And now the situation, I must say, is critical. In other words, Cornelia has decided to check the financial reports. And what does it have to deal with you?" Victor shouted. "Don't you understand? If she finds out, I'll be thrown out, and I'll wander the world as a homeless person." Valeriana gracefully stretched. "Firstly, don't shout at me. And secondly, you're exaggerating everything. It's known that fear has big eyes. Think about it. You're still the lawful husband, and even if you fail as a partner, you still have full rights to your wife's property. After all, you don't have any children, do you?" The man became cautious. "What do you mean? Don't pretend you don't understand what I'm talking about. Admit that you yourself have considered such an option many times. How do you know what I'm thinking?" Valeriana tightly embraced Victor by the neck and whispered, "During our secret meetings, my dear, I did a little research on you. I know everything about you, what you're thinking, and what you'll do in the next moment. For example, right now, you want to free yourself from my embrace and run away." Victor forcefully pushed Valeriana away from him. "You're a witch. Stop digging into my mind. It's unpleasant for me. Fine, I won't do it anymore. But think about my words in your spare time. I remember you told me not long ago that there comes a time when important decisions must be made. And if you miss that moment, fate won't give you a second chance." After bidding farewell to Valeriana, Victor didn't go home. He needed to carefully think everything through and find a way out of the critical situation. He had long realized that his marriage with Cornelia had cracked. The charm of love faded quickly when he realized that Cornelia wasn't the woman he had dreamed of, but it was too late to back down. Moreover, he couldn't afford the luxury of ending their marriage. He needed to find another solution. And Victor endured his wife's reproaches and dissatisfaction. It must be admitted that at first, Cornelia's complaints didn't bother him much. But then she began to express negativity about him personally and their family life more and more often, and he didn't hold back either. After another reproach from his wife, he asked, "You're always dissatisfied. I'm doing my best to make the company succeed, and yet you complain about every little thing." Cornelia then looked at him with surprise, as if she saw him for the first time. "Victor, right now I'm not talking about the company, but about our family. And what is wrong with it? We've been together for so many years, and we don't have children. You know my stance on this matter. Everything has its time, there's no need to rush. And when do you think that right time will come? When we're in our 40s? My parents constantly ask me this question, and I don't know what to answer." Victor knew the answer perfectly well, but he couldn't voice it because it would risk him losing all his privileges. He had quickly become accustomed to a comfortable and well-off life on his wife's money. Losing all of that was scarier to him than death. But he couldn't lie to himself either. Like any healthy man, Victor was attracted to beautiful women. At first, it was short-lived and non-committal relationships. But then Valeriana entered his life, and she had her own plans. The girl was ambitious and one day demanded, "Do what you want, my dear Victor, but I also intend to express myself." Victor initially took this bold statement from his mistress as a joke. "All right. And how do you plan to do that? And more importantly, what does it have to do with me?" "It's simple. You have to help me with my collection. To be precise, it's not entirely my idea, but that doesn't matter because I've completely changed the concept." Although Victor had helped young authors before, Valeriana's proposal made him wary. "Who is the other or the real author of your collection? And why the urgency? Is this an interrogation? Fine, I'll lay all my cards on the table. I just based it on the project we worked on in college with a friend, but she immediately backed out of the competition, and I didn't have time to finish it. I also didn't have the means to implement the project. And why did you think of her now? I don't even know. It just happened. I was going through my things and stumbled upon old notes. And the money? You said that the first time everything hinged on the financial aspect." Valeriana wasn't fazed at all. On the contrary, she even said provocatively, "But you wouldn't refuse to give me a little money, would you? I would gladly accept such a gift from you." The girl looked at her lover with such tenderness that he gave in. "Of course, I'll help if the amount is significant. But you have to understand that I'm taking a big risk." "With what?" "After all, the company is in your hands." "You're mistaken, darling. It's only in one hand, the other one is tightly held by my wife." "Again, your wife. No matter what we talk about, Cornelia is always there. I'm starting to think she's lying between us when we're together. Will it always be like this?" "No, my dear. I promise I'll find a way out." Victor was surprised when he saw the amount his mistress demanded, but it was too late to back down. and he decided to use the company's money. The operation went smoothly, and he repeated this scheme several times. I'll return it later if necessary. Maybe my wife won't notice anything. But Cornelia noticed. Secretly from her mother, she told her father about the problem. Antonio listened to his daughter and then said in a harsh tone, "If we confirm that my son-in-law is behind this fraud, I'll definitely lock him up for a long time. And it's all your foolishness." Cornelia didn't understand the hint. "What are you talking about, Dad?" "It's all about the same thing. About the illiterate approach to important documents. Why didn't you warn me? My lawyers wouldn't have allowed an unfavorable deal to go through. Victor was against the intervention of outsiders. Am I an outsider? This skunk is thriving on my money. You see, Dad, we both made a mistake. You also were of a better opinion of Victor, didn't you?" "Yes, my dear. This swindler deceived us. But don't worry, we'll expose him. My guys will check every digit." Cornelia was also eagerly awaiting the results of the financial team's work. But when the investigation was nearing completion, a fire broke out at night. Fortunately, the fire was quickly extinguished, but all the financial documentation was burned. One of the accounting employees casually dropped a comment. "It's very strange. Only the payment records for the past 6 months burned." Cornelia found this peculiar as well. She requested, "Please give me lists of all the company employees and also the lists of those who have resigned." "For what period?" Without hesitation, Cornelia replied, "For all the years of my leadership." Half an hour later, 2 lists were sitting on her desk. The second list contained only about a dozen names. One of them seemed very familiar to her. Cornelia called her secretary. "Please, invite Victor." Her husband appeared displeased with the summons. "Isn't the scandal at home enough for you? Now you want to stir up trouble at work too? Why are you so nervous?" "Because strange things are happening to us, first the investigations, and now this fire. I want to discuss this emergency with you." "What specifically are you interested in?" "The information about the author of the collection you are promoting." Victor didn't expect this question. He squirmed in his chair as if sitting on hot coals. "Fine, I'll reveal a secret to you that has long been known to everyone. It's Valeriana Santis. The one who worked with us for a couple of months and then resigned?" "What are you hinting on, Cornelia? This is going too far. You urgently need to see a psychologist because you clearly have a persecution mania." "Don't shout at me. No one is accusing anyone yet. But I intend to involve competent employees in this matter." "You've lost your mind. Can you imagine how this will affect the company's reputation?" "I've considered all the aspects." Cornelia didn't elaborate on her plans. Something in her husband's behavior greatly alarmed her, but what she disliked the most was that Victor made an effort not to look her in the eye. She had never seen him behave like this before. She sat there lost in her thoughts for another half hour, then decisively dialed the number her father had given her. "Is this a detective agency?" "Yes, I need help." Cornelia arranged to meet the private investigator in the park not to attract the attention of her employees. She explained the essence of the case in detail, but the detective asked, "Cornelia, how is your family? Is everything going well?" This question caught the businesswoman off guard. However, since the case required clarity, she confessed with some embarrassment. "Not entirely." At the end of the day, she received a message from the detective on her mobile phone, sending you a photo for identification. The photo showed a girl in her 20s, looking at Cornelia with a brazen challenge. Undoubtedly, she was beautiful. And that face seemed familiar to Cornelia. In the evening, while her husband was taking a shower, Cornelia took his phone. It was the first time she had allowed herself to do this in her life, but she didn't regret it. Because she found a lot of interesting things in Victor's mobile phone. But most importantly, she saw many explicit photos of that girl. God, he doesn't even hide this filth. Cornelia didn't mention this discovery or her conversation, nor with the detective, neither with Victor. She was already falling asleep when her husband's phone vibrated on the nightstand. Victor went downstairs, and fragments of the conversation could be clearly heard. "Valeriana, don't shout at me. You're panicking. Nothing has been lost yet. I'll come to you tomorrow morning, and we'll talk." Cornelia decided not to start a scandal during the night, but to confront her husband in the morning. She had already decided that she would file for divorce immediately. But for some reason, after making this decision, she felt relieved and quickly fell asleep. Cornelia didn't hear when her husband woke up. He probably sensed that everything was falling apart for him. "It's all right, it's going to get even worse now." The woman went down to the garage and, after 5 minutes, was speeding along the highway. To boost her confidence, Cornelia turned up the music to the max. There was a turn ahead, and a truck was coming towards her. Cornelia pressed the brake pedal as hard as she could, but the car was moving at its maximum speed. The last thing she remembered was the screeching of metal and the music. Then everything plunged into a black abyss, and only pain pulsated everywhere. It was a terrible and unbearable pain. Dark. Dark and painful. Cornelia couldn't even understand what was worse, this dark darkness or the pain. No, it was still the pain. It was all-consuming. Although, no, her head, face, and neck hurt the most. She tried to sink back into sleep. It wasn't so painful there, but heard voices. They were disturbing her. One was calm and unfamiliar, and the other was her husband's voice. That's what bothered her. Because Victor was speaking in a manner that wasn't as softly, yet his voice still sounded shrill and nervous. Cornelia strained her last bit of strength to understand what her husband was saying to that man and heard only one sentence. "How much should I pay you for her not to wake up?" Pain flared somewhere in Cornelia's brain, and she finally sank into darkness. It was good there. There was no pain or fear. Oh God, poor girl. She realized she was alive again. With great effort, she opened her eyes and saw a full-figured woman mopping the floor and muttering to herself. They drive like crazy, not thinking about anything, not taking care of themselves. Cornelia wanted to say that it wasn't true, that she was a cautious driver. But she couldn't manage to say anything. Not only could she not speak, but she couldn't do anything at all. It was a muffled sigh or squeak. The woman, despite her full figure, quickly approached her. "She's awake. Oh my goodness." And then she disappeared. Cornelia was tired. She closed her eyes. The attempt to say anything took her last bit of strength. In a semi-dream state, so sluggish and warm, Cornelia heard people talking nearby. Something about how things could have been much worse, and now she would recover. She became less scared, and she fell asleep. She dreamt of Victor. He looked at her with angry eyes and yelled, "Valeriana is better than you. Better. And you shouldn't interfere with us, so you must die." Cornelia wanted to escape from him, but she stumbled and fell. Victor leaned over her, repeating mockingly, "Cornelia, Cornelia." She opened her eyes. A man in a white cap was leaning over her. He smiled and said, "Well, hello there. Welcome back." Cornelia wanted to respond, but she couldn't. The doctor noticed this. "Don't try to talk for now. You have several fractures in your jaw. But don't worry, we've fixed everything up nicely. In about a week, or maybe even sooner, we'll gradually start working on your speech. Don't worry, the worst is over. If everything goes well, we'll transfer you to a hospital room by evening. Rest up. I'll come back later." Doctor went away, and Cornelia caught her breath. Everything hurt, everything throbbed, but now it wasn't as frightening. Now, lying alone, she recalled hearing her husband. Most likely, she imagined it. But what if not? The tension made her head ache even more. She needed to think. But what was there to think about? The previous evening, she saw Victor leaving her garage. It wouldn't have been a big deal, except they had two garages. One was his, and one was hers. On the other hand, he might have needed something, like a key. Cornelia would have smirked if she could. What kind of key? She remembered when they were driving together to a restaurant for some event, and they had a flat tire. So what? They waited for almost 2 hours until some service arrived and changed the tire. Victor didn't even attempt to do it. He said he wouldn't do it, although at that time, Cornelia thought he simply didn't know how. All of this seemed suspicious. The fire, their conversation, and then the accident right after. Could Victor go to such extremes? If what she heard wasn't her imagination, then her husband wants to send her to the other side. And since she didn't die the first time, he would try to finish what he started. In the evening, they cautiously transferred her to a hospital room. Cornelia could move one arm and one leg, although with difficulty. Everything hurt immensely, but the pain of movement was even somewhat pleasant. Cornelia was so afraid that it was serious and that she would be bedridden forever. "Well, how are you?" She saw the same doctor who had visited her before. Only now he was without his cap and turned out to be a fairly attractive man in his 40s. She blinked. "Well, that's good. And I have very good news for you. Your relatives have been found. Your phone was severely damaged. All the papers and everything that was in the car are with the police. They gave me your husband's number there, in the police station, and that's it." I could barely get through. Cornelia's eyes widened in horror, while the doctor continued. "He has already arrived and really wants to visit you." She grew concerned. The doctor looked at her in surprise, not understanding whether she was overjoyed or the opposite. Finally, Cornelia raised her hand and gestured that she needed to write something. The doctor nodded, took out a piece of paper from his pocket, and handed her a pen. With great effort, she wrote, "Don't let him in." The doctor looked bewildered at Cornelia. "You don't want to see your husband? Even if you had an argument, now you definitely need to reconcile. A loved one should be by your side." She raised her hand again. "He wants to get rid of me. Call my father." With her last bit of strength, she wrote down the number and closed her eyes. The doctor looked at what she had written for a while and then said, "All right. I'll come up with something for your husband. And I'll also call your father." He left, and Cornelia heard Victor protesting on the other side of the door. Then the voices subsided, and she felt a little relieved. He wasn't allowed to come in. That was good. She didn't know how much time had passed when she heard someone enter the room. It was strange, but it became quiet again. She knew someone was there, but nobody approached her. Her heart constricted with fear, and the next second, she saw Victor above her. "Well, hello, my dear. How are you?" Cornelia recoiled, and Victor noticed it. "So, you figured it all out? You're to blame for everything, Cornelia. Absolutely everything. Why the hell did you start acting all high and mighty? Well, tell me, was your life miserable?" "No, it was great. But you had to meddle. And now, you could have survived. I would have had time to do everything I needed while you lay here, but your daddy shut down all access. And when did you even have time to give him all the rights? Of course, you won't prove anything. There are no documents. But it's all so frustrating. And Valeriana is getting nervous. That's not good." Victor stared at Cornelia in the semi-darkness. His gaze terrified her. She closed her eyes and prepared for death. "Why are you here in the dark?" Victor stepped back from Cornelia. Antonio and Isabella were standing at the doorway. "Darling." The woman rushed towards her. Cornelia breathed a sigh of relief. She had been saved. Victor, glancing at his stern father-in-law, hurriedly leaned over and lightly kissed Cornelia on the forehead like a corpse, then left. The parents sat on both sides of the bed. "How did this happen, darling? You always drove so well." Cornelia blinked and started crying. She didn't even know why. Maybe it was because the danger had passed, or maybe it was because her parents were there. Cornelia could see that her mother was also wiping away tears. She didn't expect this. Her mother didn't put on a show and didn't even care about ruining her makeup. In fact, her mother looked scared and confused. Cornelia really was a good driver. Yes, she enjoyed driving fast, but she was always careful. Her father had taught her the initial driving skills. Then she went through formal training to obtain her driver's license. By the way, she passed the test on her first try, without her father's money. He always said he was willing to pay for everything except one thing: Cornelia had to learn how to drive for her own safety. She raised her hand and made a gesture as if she were writing. Isabella immediately took out a small notepad and a pen from her purse. Say what you like, but she always had everything for any situation. Her mother held the notepad, Cornelia formed the letters, and her father carefully read them. Victor wants to send me to the other side. Isabella dropped the notepad and clutched her chest. Antonio picked it up, placed it on his knee, and then looked at his daughter seriously. I understand that you have reasons to think that way, he said, slightly nodding. Cornelia raised her hand with the pen again. Valeriana Santos. Who is that? He asked. Mistress, she wrote. I see. Money, mistresses. I get it. But that's a whole different matter. Suddenly, Antonio froze. Wait, he was with you today. Did he say anything? Cornelia carefully wrote, yes. He said it was my fault. Isabella jumped up. Antonio, I don't understand anything. Why are you still here? You have enough means to crush him into dust. Antonio gave her a stern look, hoping that Isabella would stop yelling, but she didn't even bat an eyelid. He had to raise his voice. Isabella, calm down. Cornelia watched with surprise as her mother obediently sat down. Her mother? It couldn't be. Despite all his sternness, her father always danced to her mother's tune. So, here's the plan. I will talk to the doctor and find out what's going on. Of course, it's too early to take you home, but I can definitely arrange for some security. He left. Isabella leaned over her daughter, gently stroking her hand. My girl, does it hurt much? I'll stay with you, won't go anywhere until your father's guards settle in. And your husband, your father will find him. You know what kind of man your father is, Isabella smiled, but Cornelia looked at her and didn't recognize her. Who was this woman in front of her? Where was that capricious lady who constantly played to the audience? Before her sat a mother, kind, caring, real. Cornelia missed the moment when she fell asleep. She remembered that a nurse came, gave her a few shots, wished her a good night, and left. However, before the injections, Isabella had taken photos of all the medications and the nurse herself. After the shots, the pain started to fade, and her eyelids grew heavy. She saw her mother, who was giving orders to someone over the phone about what to buy, what to bring, but she didn't hear the end of the conversation. Several days passed. In the morning, Cornelia had her bandage changed to a different one, and now she could speak a little and even drink juice or broth through a straw. Her mother only went home to sleep at night. And even then, she spent the first night here. That night, Cornelia woke up in the middle of the night, saw her mother sleeping in a chair, she mentally smiled, and fell back asleep peacefully. For a brief moment, she felt small and protected from all of this. Cornelia, how do you feel about postponing your show? You're in the hospital, and it's the real chaos in your fashion house. Victor is missing, her mother said. Cornelia raised an eyebrow, and her mother realized she had said too much. Well, while we were here, on that day, he must have immediately rushed to withdraw money. All the accessible accounts have been cleaned out. And he's nowhere to be found, just like Valeriana. During the time we spent here, they could have gone far. Mom, is the fashion house still operating? It is, but the mood among your girls is not great. Someone spread a rumor that you don't have any money left, and they won't be getting their salaries. Cornelia smirked. She was sure that there were people at work with whom Victor had more than just professional relationships. Most likely, the wind was blowing from that direction. She looked at the young man who sat quietly in the corner. He was so inconspicuous that Cornelia sometimes forgot about his presence. "Excuse me, can I talk to you?" He immediately approached. "I'm listening, Cornelia. I have a personal safe deposit box at the bank. I need to find out how to access it, considering that I can't do it myself right now." "All right, I'll take care of it." He left, and literally a few minutes later, another guy, just as inconspicuous, took his place. "Cornelia, what do you have in there?" "Money, Mom. I've been saving a little bit all the time, well, just in case of a rainy day." Victor didn't know anything about it. "There's enough money there to keep the fashion house afloat for 2 or 3 months without touching the profits." Isabella looked at her daughter with respect. "I'm proud of you. You're very much like your father. I can never save anything. And besides, as Antonio says, money is not good for me." By evening, her mother had left. "Hello, Cornelia. So, how are we doing?" The woman smiled a little and blushed. "Good. That's good when it's good." He glanced at the guard. "Excuse me, I need to examine the patient." The guard quickly exited. "I couldn't reach you all day. It's like scheduling an audience." "Oh, come on, Macario. This is your kingdom. Just stomp your foot and chase everyone away." He looked thoughtfully at her. "You know, I couldn't even lift my foot to stomp when Isabella is nearby. She's such a woman. So extraordinary. When I told my mom that I see the unforgettable Isabella every day, she almost went crazy. My mom has always been a fan of your mother's talent. And even though my mother is older than yours, she believes that Isabella is the model to follow. She says that only women like her should work in the theater and on the big stage. If my mom could, she would have rushed here long ago." "What about your mom?" "She was in an accident 10 years ago and has been using a wheelchair ever since." "Yes, Cornelia, don't look at me like that. There are injuries that doctors can't fix. It's sad. But we shouldn't cry over the split milk. Things are going great for you, so let's stay positive." After the examination, Macario left, and Cornelia couldn't sleep for a long time. For some reason, she was smiling. Then she shook herself. What nonsense was getting into her head? Just a few days ago, she almost died. Her husband wanted to get rid of her. She was covered in bandages and a cast. It's unclear what's happening at work. And here she is lying and thinking about how Macario's new haircut suits him. Cornelia seemed to be getting excited even. She lay awake for a long time. She wanted to press the button with her working hand, but she let her hand fall. For some reason, she remembered Valeriana. Until now, she had only vague memories of her, but now she remembered her very clearly. The girl had come to apply for a job as a designer. Cornelia always had great respect for people who could create clothes. After all, it seemed like there was nothing else left to invent. But, as she understood herself and as those who worked with her understood, there was still so much ahead. She had also seen those who only considered themselves designers but, in reality, presented their wishes as reality. With such people, it was immediately evident from their sketches that they themselves didn't understand what the final result should be. She personally conducted interviews for anyone who came for such a position. It was the same that time. In the office, there stood a tall, striking girl. At that time, Cornelia thought that everything was fine in their family. She didn't even consider the possibility that Valeriana could become her husband's mistress. There wasn't even a hint of such a thought. The girl looked at her quite boldly. "Have a seat. My name is Cornelia. Do you have any of your designs with you? Have they been sewn and showcased anywhere?" The girl gave her perfectly straight bangs a little shake. "Oh, you should know that if there's no money, there won't be any shows either. Do you have any sketches?" Cornelia smiled. Yes, the girl clearly sees herself as a brilliant designer because she feels overly confident. Valeriana pulled out a folder with sketches and stood next to Cornelia. "Have a seat." "But I can explain." "No need. If your sketches are good, they will speak for themselves." Cornelia leafed through the folder for a long time. Not because she was interested in the drawings in it, but just to avoid hurting the girl's feelings. How could she tell her that her sketches couldn't even be called good? She didn't know yet. "Have you worked anywhere before?" "No. I went to 2 firms, but there are some, freaks sitting there. They're probably all waiting for bribes, but I'm principled and don't give money." "So, you have no experience at all?" "Why do I need experience as a designer?" "You understand, the more you come up with things, the more blurred your vision becomes." Cornelia smiled again. In some ways, you are certainly right. Unfortunately, your sketches didn't impress me, so I can't hire you for the position of a designer at the moment. I can advise you to start from the very beginning, to feel and understand the fabric." "I see. As always, money solves everything." Valeriana angrily stuffed the drawings back into the folder. "Of course, it's easy to talk when things are handed to you on a silver platter. Suddenly, the miracle happens, and you're on top." "You're mistaken, Valeriana. I also worked as an ordinary seamstress here. When we acquired this company, it had so many debts that they exceeded the value of the entire business several times over." Now Cornelia couldn't answer herself why she was saying all this to Valeriana, for what purpose. And the girl stopped. "Fine. I guess I'll give it a try. Who knows, maybe you're right." And just a couple of weeks later, the other workers started complaining about Valeriana. "Cornelia, either you forbid her entering other offices, or I quit." "What happened, Katerina?" Cornelia didn't understand anything at all. Katerina was the best. When inspiration struck her, she could create a masterpiece in just half an hour. Of course, the model would be refined later, but the initial idea was always preserved. "It's the new seamstress. She constantly snoops around our designs. She gives unsolicited advice that no one needs, of course. She took it upon herself to teach me how to make a wedding dress lighter. I couldn't help it and simply sent her away. And you know what she did? During lunchtime, she sneaked into my office and ruined the sketch. And she even wrote, 'Don't thank me.'" Katerina threw the sketch on the boss's desk. Cornelia immediately understood that Valeriana was behind it. She had a distinct, clumsy style. Her patience had run out. Cornelia always supported freedom. Anyone could leave work if necessary, with the condition of making up for the missed hours later. Anyone could visit another office, have a coffee, discuss something. It was part of the creative process, it was normal. But what happened? Katerina had been working on the wedding collection for almost half a year. It was a huge order from a prestigious wedding salon. The first dresses were already being sewn, the deal was extremely lucrative, and then this happened. On the way downstairs, where the seamstresses were sitting, Cornelia ran into her husband. "And where are we all going with such serious faces?" Cornelia waved her hand. "Come with us, you'll see." Intrigued, Victor followed them. Cornelia didn't like shouting, but when Valeriana interrupted her, tried to justify herself, and claimed that things had improved significantly, Cornelia snapped. "One more stunt like this, and you'll be out the door. You won't be able to find work as a designer or even as a seamstress." Cornelia turned on her heels and walked out. Katerina, with a satisfied look on her face, went back to her office. Valeriana, seeing that the boss was still watching her, quickly shed a tear. Cornelia was now certain that Valeriana had planned her fate using Victor. However, a month later, Valeriana quit on her own. To be honest, Cornelia wasn't even upset. "Victor, how long are we going to stay here?" Victor wearily closed his eyes. Who had convinced him to get involved with her? How were they going to untangle themselves from all of this now? Valeriana, you know perfectly well that we need to lay low for now. We can't draw attention, at least not temporarily. Who knows, if she survives, if she survived, what she might say. Valeriana sat up in bed, positioning herself to get a clear view of Victor. Listen, you seemed so sophisticated, so clever. Why did you say such things to her? Maybe she didn't even consider that you were involved in anything. Well, of course. The money is gone, the documents burned for inspection, and she still believes I'm the best. Well, why not? And she doesn't remember anything, 100%. She was in such a state that words can't describe. Then I'll ask again, why are we staying here? You forget about my father-in-law. He's not just a regular guy, he's a former gangster, even if he calls himself an honest businessman. I don't want to cross paths with him. Valeriana pouted capriciously. You promised me. You promised that my collection would be showcased. You promised that everything would be fine. Do I have to find another person in the fashion world? Trust me, I can. Victor couldn't imagine someone else embracing Valeriana with their hands. The mere thought of it drove him mad. He sat down as well. Have you ever considered taking on a pseudonym? A pseudonym? Why? Not just a pseudonym, but creating an entire legend. That you came from afar and all that. You see, people are gullible. The key is to plant in their minds what we need. And then no one will try to link us to Valeriana and Victor. She looked at him for a long moment, then replied. There's something in that. Something, Valeriana smiled. Come to me, my little kitty. Victor rented a decent space, hired a team of seamstresses. He was diligently working, and since he had been in this business for a long time, so there were no hiccups. Valeriana was buzzing around, full of energy. He didn't tell her that they didn't have a lot of money, and if the collection failed, they wouldn't even have enough to pay for a cup of coffee. The work was in full swing. Valeriana hardly ever showed up at the rented apartment. During long evenings, Victor would browse the news on the internet. Wait, this is very interesting. He opened a small note stating that Cornelia had been discharged for further treatment at home. Immediately below was a bold headline saying that the police were looking for him, Victor. It must have been an orbital thing. Of course, they were in the capital now. It's easier to get lost here than anywhere else. But his heart still skipped a beat. A couple of months later, Valeriana came home in a buoyant mood. Victor, we can start looking for a space. But one where they'll accept us. And we can begin advertising. 75% of the collection is ready. Isn't that too fast? Victor asked. Well, you're not interested in how those sheep work. But I kept an eye on everything and even introduced a 2-shift system. You know, right now, I believe that fame is just one step away. Victor hugged her tightly. So, who did a good job? He asked. Valeriana didn't fall for the provocation. We did. We did, Victor. The fashion show promised to be grand. Victor scraped together the remaining money for advertising. He understood that in order to set prices, he needed to invite not just anyone but people who could afford such prices. Of course, there were plenty of them in the capital, but they probably didn't read advertising announcements on fences. It required a much more subtle approach. And Victor decided that he needed to make personal visits to those he wanted to see at the show. Surprisingly, influential and wealthy people responded. But what was so surprising about that? They all had wives, some of them had mistresses. About a week after the start of the advertising campaign, he managed to secure a meeting with a prominent businessman. In narrow circles, he was known as The Rock. There was a vague suspicion that he had brought his nickname from the same 90s. After listening to Victor and flipping through the colorful brochure, he suddenly looked at Victor. Where, you say, did Taya come from? Oh, it's quite a story. Her parents divorced when she was very young. Her mother took her to Italy. Taya lived there her whole life. Naturally, she went to school and then decided to return to her ancestral homeland. They made up this story the entire evening. They memorized the names of non-existent relatives, looked at photos of the city where the girl supposedly was born. Well, I see. All right, my wife and I will definitely come, the man said. As soon as Victor left, the man dialed a number. Antonio, my dear friend, how are you? How are things? He listened, and his face grew dark. So, that's how it is? And it turns out, I'm calling you about this. I just met a person. Wait, let me look at the business card. Ah, Sergio Rubio. So, it seemed to me that he's your son-in-law. I only saw him for 5 minutes at Cornelia's wedding, but you know my memory always serves me right. The man listened again for a while, then smiled. Well, you know, Antonio. You can always count on my help. We are old friends, after all. When Cornelia started to stand up and move on her own, Macario felt a pang of sadness. No, of course, he was glad that such a smart and beautiful girl was recovering, but he understood that she would soon leave the hospital and they would never see each other again. Meanwhile, Cornelia was thinking about how to talk to her mother so she wouldn't refuse her request. As soon as Cornelia started feeling better and confidently made progress, Isabella returned to her usual star-like state. The hospital staff adored her, with Cornelia rolling her eyes and her father laughing. But her mother made things much easier for her. She somehow started the conversation herself. Cornelia, have you thought about how to thank Macario? He's a very decent doctor. He knows his job and doesn't take any money. Isabella stumbled and looked at her daughter. Mom, have you already tried to offer him money? Isabella suddenly snorted. You know, I thought there were no more people who don't take money. Turns out, they still exist. You won't believe it, I stared at him for about 5 minutes as if he was a dinosaur. Mom was an actress, and a very good one at that. The way it was told was so amusing that Cornelia couldn't help but smile. Mom, when will you stop playing roles? She asked. Isabella stood up and paced around the room. Cornelia, I don't understand you. All the world's a stage, and people are actors. People, mind you. Everyone has their own role, and the better they play it, the better it is for everyone. But let's get to the point. Do you have any ideas? Leaving someone like him without a gift would be very wrong. Cornelia nodded. I do, Mom. The woman raised an eyebrow. Macario has a mother whom he loves very much. His mother had an accident and hasn't been able to walk for many years. She moves around in a wheelchair. When Macario told her about the person who visits his hospital, his mother burst into tears. She has idolized you as an actress and singer her whole life. And here's the opportunity to visit her son and see you, but she can't take advantage of it. Of course, Macario could bring her here, but she refused, saying that even artists can feel, we have enough sorrow here, and she would only add her autographs to it. Very interesting, very nice, but I don't understand where you're going with this, Isabella said. Mom, could you visit Macario's mother? I understand that it's not your usual practice, that you shouldn't visit fans. Isabella raised her hand. Cornelia, you're stopping me from thinking. Cornelia sighed. That's her mother for you. One moment, she's just a mother, and the next, she's an untouchable star, inaccessible to ordinary mortals. You know, I like this idea. And I also think we should surprise her. So much so that even our doctor won't be able to warn or prepare her mother. But how do we find out his address? We can't just go around asking the staff. A security guard stood up from the corner of the room. Excuse me, Isabella. If you let me, I can help you. It's not that difficult. Renato? Well, go ahead. It'll be some use from you at least, considering Antonio keeps a whole staff for no reason, she replied. 10 minutes later, they had Macario and his mother's address. Isabella smiled. Thank you. The security guard smiled contentedly and returned to his post. I'll go right now. Macario has the day off today, so he'll open the door. I wouldn't want to arrive and find out she can't open it, Isabella said. In the evening, Macario came to Cornelia's room. He silently sat on the edge of the bed, then looked at the girl. Cornelia, you have no idea what you've done for us, for my mother. You see, she tries hard not to let me see how much she's suffering. I pretend not to notice, not to see the sorrow in her eyes when she looks out the window and sees her neighbors gathering on the bench. I tried to convince her to come downstairs. There's an elevator in the building, and when I'm home, I could take her out. But she turned away and said she didn't want everyone pitying her. Today, she was so happy that I can't put it into words. When Cornelia was discharged, Macario walked her out. Isabella took her husband's arm and dragged him aside. Isabella, what's going on? He asked. Just let them say goodbye, she said. Them? He looked at his daughter and the doctor and widened his eyes. No way. It may seem unlikely, but that's how it is. Of course, he's not a millionaire, but at least he's achieved something in his life. Antonio sighed heavily. Isabella, sometimes you should refrain from your comments. Cornelia was home for almost a month. She visited her modeling agency a few times. The first time she was greeted with thunderous applause. The work was in full swing, and in a couple of weeks, they could start preparing for the show. She missed them a little, but one evening she received a message on her phone. Indifferently, she picked up the phone, but then her eyes widened. How is my patient feeling? Cornelia started writing a reply several times, but then deleted it. Finally, she decided and wrote, she misses her doctor. There was no response for a long time. She scolded herself with her last words. And then, probably an hour had passed since she sent the text, the doorbell buzzed and the video intercom turned on. Cornelia approached it and was amazed. There, on the monitor, was Macario with a huge bouquet of crimson roses. On that day, they decided to have a festive dinner to celebrate the completion of the collection. Well, my daughter, another victory? Antonio asked. Dad, this is only half the victory. Whether it's a victory or not will be shown by the fashion show, she laughed. That's a pun intended. Well, honestly, Cornelia, I have no doubt in you. Macario raised his glass and smiled at her. Me too. Isabella snorted. If someone has no doubt, it's me, because Cornelia is my daughter. Everyone laughed, and at that moment, Antonio's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and raised an eyebrow. The Rock? Could something have happened? He picked up the phone, walked to the window, had a brief conversation, and then returned to everyone. Isabella touched his hand. Antonio, what happened? Well, how can I put it? Victor and his passion are organizing a grand fashion show for her collection. It's quite surprising that they didn't squander the money they got their hands on but put it into something productive. Cornelia looked puzzled at her father. A fashion show? That's right. I believe we should let them see it through. I invite all of you to the fashion show in the capital. And at the end of the show, they will be taken care of, Antonio explained. Isabella suddenly smiled. Oh no, guys, I thirst for blood and revenge. I have a plan too. Antonio sighed. Darling, maybe we can deal without it? No. They must feel their worthlessness, and only then they can be imprisoned. Antonio knew that arguing here was futile. Over the years on the theatrical stages, Isabella had perfected the art of revenge. And I suppose there's no choice. Of course not, Antonio. You know that all you're required to provide is the finances. Cornelia even smiled. If her mother got involved, heads would roll for sure. Nobody would escape. Macario looked on with wide eyes. He cleared his throat and spoke up. Isabella, count me in too, if you allow. She laughed. Macario, dear, you have no choice. You're already with us. If I'm not mistaken, you are planning to become part of our family, right? Cornelia blushed deeply, and Macario looked at her lovingly. I won't deceive you. The truth is, I haven't proposed to Cornelia yet. I believe she needs to recover and gain strength first. Well, that's great. Now, everyone, gather around. Look at what I've come up with. The fashion show had to be even more spectacular than Taya or Valeriana Santos had planned. That influential businessman had offered them a substantial amount of money as an investment in exchange for the opportunity to preview and reserve the model's sketches for his ladies. Neither Valeriana nor Victor had expected such an offer. He rubbed his hands together gleefully. After the show, when everything is sold, we can leave the country right away and start thinking about something more serious abroad. No one will bother us there. Well, I have nothing to fear. Those are my designs, and I haven't targeted your wife. So I think I'll stay. Oh, how we talked, Victor smirked. Where would you be without me? I gave you the money, I arranged everything, I did it all. What have you done? Took someone else's sketches and passed them off as your own? Valeriana paled. They are mine. I completely transformed everything there, and believe me, if you hadn't done it, someone else would have. So, my dear, don't exaggerate your contributions. Victor openly admired Valeriana. She looked so beautiful when she was angry. Although, at some point, she reminded him of a witch, not for the first time. He embraced her in a conciliatory manner. All right, enough arguing. We have a big event today. How many dresses did Pablo select? 3. And the most expensive ones, 2. Well, that's cool. Look at how many people are here. When Cornelia got her hands on the sketches, she even gasped. This can't be. Isabella looked at her questioningly. Cornelia, what happened? Mom, look at this. She turned her laptop toward her, showing the photos that her dad's friend had sent her. Well, let me see. Wait, this reminds me of something. If we remove these awkward ruffles. Isabella looked at the photograph. The way of drawing with multiple lines. Cornelia. This can't be. This is your sketch. What's with these ruffles? Isabella spoke while simultaneously piecing the answers together. I don't understand how she got your sketches. Mom, this was my graduation project. The entire folder was at work. Sometimes we took things from there, and then it disappeared. I searched for it, but I thought I had misplaced the sketches myself. They still had a childish look, but the ruffles and embroidery ruined them completely. Isabella looked at her daughter. She's already been thinking about the new plane in her mind. Valeriana was slightly nervous. There were so many people that there was no room to breathe. It seemed like everything was even better than she had expected, but a vague uneasiness plagued her. Victor smiled. What's up? Pull yourself together. The show starts in 15 minutes. Yeah, I guess I got a bit nervous. The music played, and the host appeared on stage. He spoke cheerfully, exciting the audience. Valeriana sat slightly off to the side, on a balcony hidden from the visitors' view. The host disappeared, and the first girl walked onto the runway. She gracefully moved to the end of the stage, following the music, twirled impressively, and walked back. Victor, who was sitting next to Valeriana, asked, "Why didn't you remove that ruffle? It looks like a fifth leg on a dog." Indeed, Valeriana could see it now herself. How could she say that she added that ruffle deliberately? By the middle of the show, it became evident that it was a loud, deafening failure. Whistles started in the audience, and no one tried to book the clothes. Valeriana watched the humiliation in silence. Victor, you're such a jerk. You purposely invited people who know nothing about fashion. He leaned in closer to her. Maybe only one person here doesn't understand fashion, and that's you? What? She stood up, ready to lunge at his face, but something strange was happening on the stage. Victor and Valeriana stared at the stage. Standing next to the host was an older but incredibly striking woman. Victor exhaled. Isabella? There was no need to understand that it was all over. It was obvious. And Isabella had mentioned that it was her moment to shine. Ladies and gentlemen, before the show continues, I have to tell you a story about how Taya, the new fashion trendsetter, appropriated sketches that were done as an exam project. However, as you all saw, she successfully ruined them. She continued. The audience reacted passionately. Valeriana turned around to run, with Victor following her. But they immediately ran into Antonio, Pablo, and a few sturdy young men. Where are you going? You've been running around enough. Cornelia brought her new collection with her. Her show was planned in her hometown, but since they were already here. In fact, it was Isabella who initiated it. But you understand that none of the dresses will fit the show. Everything was done and organized with your money, so just showcase your collection. What's the issue? Especially since it's the capital. Our city is beautiful too, of course, but you know it yourself. Isabella supported Macario. Cornelia, what are you doubting? You're the best. You were planning to have a show anyway, but it had to be postponed. This is an opportunity not to waste time on organizing. After Isabella's speech, the show continued. However, now it featured models wearing Cornelia's collection. In the evening, the whole company sat in the most expensive restaurant. Cornelia received congratulations. People approached her, expressing words of admiration. She was used to success in principle, but not to such dizzying heights. The press had been writing about nothing else all day. Pablo was with his wife and daughter. They had already obtained Cornelia's consent to design a wedding dress for their daughter. And overall, after a long time, going through fear, pain, and betrayal, Cornelia felt right now that the worst was finally over. The bad things were in the past, and all the good things were ahead. In the middle of the celebration, Macario asked for a moment of attention. I'm sorry for barging in like this, but I have something to say. I'm a surgeon. They say I'm a good one. I'm not a businessman, but I seem to have everything, just not in such abundance. Nevertheless, I dare to do this. He got down on one knee in front of a blushing Cornelia and handed her an open ring box. Cornelia, you know everything. I love you like no one else has ever loved anyone. I'm sure of that. I'm asking you, please be my wife, marry me. Isabella pressed against her husband and gently wiped away a tear. Antonio looked at her in surprise, then smiled and held her close. Darling, tears spoil the complexion. Isabella playfully swung at him. After the ring was placed on Cornelia's hand and toasts were raised, Cornelia also stood up. Well, it turns out I have something to say too. Mom, Dad. I remember how much you bothered me about grandchildren. Everyone fell silent. Such silence fell over the table that you could hear the bubbles popping in the champagne. Macario stood up and stared at Cornelia. He was 41 and had no children. He had an unsuccessful marriage in his youth. Although, they had divorced just a year after the wedding. In 7 months, you will have a grandson or granddaughter. And Macario and I will have a son or daughter. What a commotion started. Macario spun Cornelia around, Isabella sobbed on her husband's shoulder, and Pablo, good-naturedly laughing, refilled the glasses. Life goes on. Sometimes you have to take a risky turn to reach a new level. To find happiness where you never thought it would be. By the way, Cornelia gave birth to twin girls. Well, it happens sometimes. Macario's mother, Isabella, convinced them to move in with her. No, of course, you can move to Macario and Cornelia. But I think we'll have much more fun together. My husband doesn't care about his age. He's constantly at work. And this way, we can occasionally take the girls from the kids. The two of us will manage just fine. Macario soon opened his own private clinic. And Cornelia realized how good it was when the interests of husband and wife did not intersect in their work. There was a trial. Victor received a life sentence. Macario tracked down the hospital employee to whom Victor offered money, so they didn't manage to slightly mitigate the sentence. Valeriana was really hoping to get away with a suspended sentence. Come on, she only took the drawings. But Victor decided it was unfair and exposed her fully. He even provided a recording from a dictaphone where she specifically urged him to get rid of Cornelia. Valeriana shouted in court, cried, and cursed Victor. In the end, everyone got what they deserved.